At a sales conference at Random House, preceding the publication of Atlas Shrugged, one of the book salesmen asked me whether I could present the essence of my philosophy while standing on one foot. I did. 1. Metaphysics, objective reality. 2. Epistemology, reason. 3. Ethics, self-interest. 4. Politics, capitalism.
My name is Lex, and you could call me a philosopher or even a guru because I teach people how to perform existential rehab on themselves. But I simply consider myself a communicator and a student in the art of living well in an unwell world. Welcome to my channel. What's happening, people? Welcome back. Objectivism Part 2, how to go beyond Ayn Rand's philosophy or philosophical framework, and why we really should, how I would do that, and what I hold as a philosophical framework if I have to. I don't hold anything in a formal, rigorous, rigid, structured sense, but if I have to box it in, contextualize it, and parameterize my philosophical framework, this is what I would do. And just to put a preface on this, you must appreciate anyone, in my opinion, that makes an effort, a sincere effort, to offer up some framework, some system for others to help them in their life, to further themselves, and really to further the collective human endeavor. You may not agree with Ayn Rand, and I really don't. I've only read Atlas Shrugged. I haven't read The Fountainhead, and I'm not going to, likely, anytime soon. It's not going to change my perspective or opinion. Nothing likely will, in my awareness, in my understanding. However, I do appreciate the attempt, and I understand where she's coming from. I believe Ayn Rand was well-intentioned and well-reasoned, but I believe she was missing a few components, a few key components that could have fleshed out and furthered her perspective. Because I appreciate what Ayn Rand's done, I'm going to use her very elegant, very simple, very condensed, and intelligently structured and constructed philosophical framework, the four-pillared format, to detail what I would hold, what I would use as a philosophical framework if I had to articulate one explicitly, specifically. And all of this is on my website currently in a very rough form called My Philosophy, believe it or not, if you want to check that out, if you want to read more about that in depth. But to begin, where Ayn Rand would begin, metaphysics. When we're talking about metaphysics, we're talking about the nature of reality, essentially, what is actually existing in real. Ayn Rand talked about the fact that reality is simply reality, and I agree. However, I do hold firmly, unshakenly, unequivocally, that reality is beyond us. The true, absolute, and fundamental and essential reality is beyond us as human beings, and likely beyond most, if not all, life that isn't absolute. All things that we can consider a living being, a mind, an entity, reality is beyond that, beyond us, because reality simply is. And it can either be engulfed, encompassed, beheld, experienced, known in one breath, or it cannot be. I don't abide by or subscribe to a fragmented view of existence and reality, a quantized or particulate view of reality. What is in between these fractals or portions of fundamental reality that can be? Well, no thing, nothing. There's an explanation, an explanatory gap there. I subscribe to an absolute, whole, and unified view of reality simply because it's more intelligent. My mind tells me that the most intelligent thing would be one thing or no thing, a completely unified whole that can produce, elicit every variation, every distinction, every variety of everything possible, knowable, conceivable. We're essentially talking about the ultimate, essential, and fundamental ground of being. In my opinion, set theory, logic, mathematics, philosophy, all of this holds a lot of richness, a lot of value here. When we talk about reality and you contextualize that in set theory, we're talking about essentially the set of all sets. The set of all sets containing all sets, including itself. This is God. This is absolute reality. This is reality with a capital R. That is reality. Now, the set of all sets in set theory, in logic, will tell you that a set of all sets really cannot contain all sets, because the set of all sets is a set that really can't be contained in that without invoking Russell's paradox. So what reality with a capital R tells me, just following logical, rational lines of thinking, is that it's likely beyond us mentally, almost certainly intellectually, cognitively. Reality with a capital R is beyond likely all cognition, all intellectual thinking. It is something that is beyond the mind. It is just known, knowable, experienced, or understood or had. We cannot conceive of a thing that contains everything, including the thing that is containing everything. It's something that we can't wrap our mind around, but I think a completely self-contained, a completely self-referential reality is how I think we should think about reality with a capital R. In my philosophical opinion, in my metaphysical framework, you must account for all things that have been, will be, can be, or are existing, or you don't have a complete explanation. Therefore, any explanation that does not account for all possible realities, all potential universes, all potential thoughts, shapes, concepts, is not a complete explanation. It must account for everything, or we're missing a portion of reality. Reality simply is. So we work our way to an absolute, indivisible, indistinct, unified reality. One context, one boundary, one parameter, one set that contains pretty much an infinite number of subsets of the absolute universal set. There's no reason to believe that reality gets more complex as we get more essential, deeper, more fundamental. There's no reason to believe this. This is not what physics is telling us. This is not even what our intuition tells us. Things become incredibly simple at more essential layers of physical reality, and I believe that's the way things are. From a wide view, we have a placid body of water, a placid mind, a perfected, stilled mind. But if you get down to a fine resolution, there may be waves, micro disturbances and fluctuations in this absolute, perfected, and stilled body. Momentarily, it looks like a different thing. From this fine granular layer of resolution, it looks like a distinct thing. And that's how we get you. That's how we get a room. That's how we get a planet. That's how we get galaxies, particles, atoms, what have you. It's just momentary distinctions from a certain perspective in a grand, unified, absolute, and indistinct whole, potentially. Epistemology, knowledge acquisition. How do we know what we know? How do we know reality is absolute? How do we know it's instinct? How do we know it's made of fine granular particles and fractals? How do we know anything? Well, we have two centers of knowledge acquisition. The rational mind is the most feeble of those, but it's the one we lean on the most and the one we're most comfortable with, the one we accept. We also have another portion, another locus of knowledge acquisition called the gut brain, the intuition, the intuitive sense. These two, in my opinion, are our powers of knowing. This is informed through the entirety of the organism. This is how simple, single cellular, multicellular organisms are able to know their environment without a mind, without a brain, without intelligence in a sense. There is an intelligence had by the mere existence of being a living being. You are informed through your interaction with your environment, and sometimes the thing that's informed is your entire being. Well, that's the gut. That's the intuition, in a sense. And of course, we have the mind, we have intellect, we have cognition, we have rationality. We can model, we can imagine, we can plan, we can analyze, and we can dissect images and thoughts and happenings and experiences and information and put it together in a cohesive, unified narrative about us, about the world, about others, and then we know. We know because things kind of match up, they congruent, and they support us, and they lead to effective, reasonable outcomes in the world. That's how we know it's true. The gut tells us that's not right. We don't want that. We don't like that. And we know because, well, it worked out. We know because, well, I did like that. When we go with this, sometimes when we're talking about and dealing with things that are not necessarily rational, that are more emotional, more feeling based, when we go with this, we kind of interfere with the intelligence of the entire organism, in my opinion. This is to be had and known instead of this. And this is the more reliable, more evolved, more trustworthy sense. However, we've built a world of mind, a world where intuitive movement is not going to get you where you need to be in a reliable and efficient fashion. So we lean upon this much more because in the world we've constructed of institution systems, of quantities, of values, we are able to realize more gain using the intellectual capacities that we have, however limited, however vast. This will get us right in terms of life, in terms of being a being, an organism. And this should be used in service of this. However, this is ignored typically, and we try to use this to write the entirety of us, even if this is in contrast, in opposition, in conflict with this. This should always be a superseding decision maker. This should be the captain, in a sense. Well, I think I want this, but it doesn't feel right. Well, they say this is the greatest neighborhood in the world, but I don't like living here. Well, ultimately, it's how you feel that determines right for you in your reality, in your metaphysical framework. This can be used, but if this disagrees with this, we must check this to achieve what I call existential homeostasis, a place where you can't imagine a movement, another thing being added or taken away, improving your existence. When you are so right that literally an alteration to that is likely a detriment to you. When you have almost perfected your existence for a period of time, you are homeostatic existentially, in my opinion. That cannot be had purely intellectually, because ultimately the entire organism, the entirety of you must be in agreement with that, or it's just a mental thing. You must create a narrative, a story, and that story must be broad and impactful and energetic enough to get you to believe that you're okay, but it never is enough because you don't feel it. There has to be a congruence, quite literally, between the mind and the gut, the body, the entire organism, and the environment before you reach homeostasis. Therefore, these two centers of knowledge acquisition are really meant to bring you to this state. We don't live in a natural environment. We don't live in an environment where we can navigate solely on gut feeling, on instinct, because our world is too complex. The world has been littered with constructs of mind. However, if we get the mind out of the way, I think we can find our way there much more readily if we only invoke it when we are dealing with things of a mental variety. Now, we can't completely rely upon our intuition. We must know some things firsthand, empirically. We must know some things for ourselves. And we must take information from others and process that, analyze that for truth, for validity, for rightness, for fit. We cannot operate purely on instinct, on gut, and we can't operate purely on our own experience of existence, interpreting it in our own story, in our own realm, in our own world, because we are somewhat in a shared environment. Not completely, not mentally, but in a physical sense, in a biological sense as an entity, we are in a shared environment. Therefore, if we ever find ourselves in a reality, in my opinion, metaphysically or epistemologically, where we are in complete disagreement with everyone else on most other things, we should probably check ourselves. The collective may not be as intelligent as a single member of the collective, but the collective can be a reliable frame of reference for what is true, what isn't true, in more base, fundamental, primal, and essential areas and zones of life. You cannot operate, in my opinion, epistemologically, in terms of knowledge acquisition. You cannot do this solely on your own. If you do, you will end up in a reality of your own, in a world, in a universe of your own making, and you will be severed, detached, distinct, cleaved from what quite literally could be called a more objective, a more broad, a more absolute reality. Ethics. What's right and wrong? How can we know what that is? Well, we cannot in an absolute sense. Metaphysically, we do not have the perspective. You cannot know what's right and wrong until you've drawn boundaries. Outside of the boundaries that you've drawn, your code, your framework, your rules do not apply. So we're always looking for some absolute moral maxim, some absolute ethical and moral framework. We cannot do that. We don't have that perspective. So the only boundaries we can draw precisely, in a sense, in a real true sense, subjectively or collectively, are around us as individuals. We can't precisely define humanity, where humanity ends, what humanity is, what humanity isn't. The only thing that we can draw precise and definitive boundaries around, in my opinion, is ourselves. We can do that with objects, with things, with other things, but we don't have the knowledge of another living being to know what's ethically and morally right for it. We can understand for an insect or something like this what it may need to be naturally right and what have you, but there's no moral or ethics because that's just life. That's not us. We don't know what's right or wrong. We can only do what's best for us in terms of it. However, for us as individuals, we can draw boundaries around ourselves and our experience of existence and know intuitively, without a doubt, unequivocally, what's right for us. Not pleasurable, not fun, not easy, and maybe not even enjoyable, but what's right. When you eat some food, you know it's good in your body. When you see a color, you know it's pleasing to you. When you hear a sound, you know you like that sound, and that's subjective. No one else can know truthfully what that is for you. So when it comes to doing what's right and wrong, we can only know that for ourselves. Now, we need to extend that to people that aren't capable or in a position to take care of themselves, children and people that are sick and ill, but we can never do that absolutely rightly because we can never know what's absolutely right for these people as we do for ourselves. So we do this with great caution, with great care, and great responsibility, knowing that we could very well be wrong, completely wrong. We take care to monitor, to see the impact, to see how we're performing, how we're doing, because we do not know. The only thing that we do know is what's right for us. So that's what we should do. We should do what's right for us, in my opinion, at every moment. But we cannot do what's right for us in a true sense in terms of what we are, our parameterized, contextualized existence of beingness. We cannot do what's absolutely and fundamentally right for us until we know ourselves, until we truly understand. It's not just intellectual. It's not just feelings. It's not biological. It's not even just purely intuitive either, because intuition may guide us away from something that in a non-absolute sense, a non-biological sense, may be right. Intuitively, we may not want to deal with the work world or politics or pay taxes. It doesn't feel right maybe to us to do certain things. However, intellectually, we know in the long run it's best to do certain things, even though we may not agree with them fundamentally 100%. We may not accept them in any way as right, but we deal. So we can only know what's right for us. We can only know unequivocally and absolutely what's right for us. So we should do that. We should take care of ourselves and inform ourselves intuitively and intellectually, cognitively, rationally, and experientially in this gut brain sense, and walk our way to right, to the most right life for us. Whatever that means subjectively, we should do that. Now, what do we do about the world? How do we come to an agreement on the world? Well, we have the tool, the power of intuition. And because we are roughly similar genetically, biologically, like the rest of each type of life is to another version, another form, another individual of that life form, we can take care of trees, we can take care of dogs and cats and cows and lions and beetles and everything if we understand that type of beetle or beetles in general. If we understand felines in general, we can take care of a cat most likely reasonably well in a physical, biological sense. If we understand a tree, we can take care of that tree, that species, that type in a sense. Even though there's millions, maybe billions of these trees, they all require roughly the same thing to be okay. I think the same thing is true for us. Ethically, morally, what's right for us is likely what's right for most other people. Because we aren't exactly the same, we must do for ourselves to get that extra few percent of rightness for us to reach existential homeostasis. But for the most part, we need water, we need some shelter, we'd like some community, some companionship, some affection, some pleasure, some enjoyment, some purpose, some work, some duty, some support. There's things that we'd like, certain nutrition. We need some fruits, some vegetables, maybe some meat, but we need protein. We need roughly the same thing. Therefore, if we look at ourselves as a context, as a parameter, as a universe of humanity, we can build a moral and ethical framework by understanding the essential components, the shared humanity that we all know, that we all possess, and build a framework, build an ethical system based purely and solely on that. And limited to that, we build a world, we build educational systems, we build communities, housing, we build work, jobs, what have you. We build political institutions, we build economic and financial institutions with a component of human beingness at the forefront as the foundation. Doing this is the way we come up with an ethical world, a moral world. We have to understand ourselves as a collective, first and foremost, deeply, fundamentally. And then we must allow each individual, each person that is able to find their last few percentage points, 0.00134578 percentage points of their truth, their uniqueness, their rightness. Because we cannot know. We cannot know what's right for them. We cannot know what is truly and ultimately right for anyone else. But we do know what's right for us in a broad, general sense. But when it comes to specific tasks, duties, partners, lifestyles, locations, habitats, occupations, hobbies, foods, flavors, we cannot know with a complete certainty or even a high degree of confidence for an individual. But if we average ourselves out as a species, we can know quite a bit about us in general. If we account for that, accommodate that, and afford that to everyone, then we are 80 to 90 to potentially 99% of the way toward an ethical and moral world, in my opinion. Now, how do we get to that last little bit? Well, that brings me to politics. Politics. How do we organize ourselves as a species? How do we relate to one another? Well, if we can adopt an absolute metaphysical perspective, one where humanity is a subset of the set of all sets, the absolute set, and one where we know we must raise the volume on our intuitive sense, on the gut brain, so that we can hear that better, that we must listen to that's a true locus source of information about ourselves and potentially the world, but at a minimum about what's right for us so that we can actually have a chance of finding homeostasis. And we also accept the fact that we all must cultivate the intellectual, the rational portion of ourselves, because we've built a very mental world, and that's the only thing that's really going to help see us through this complex maze that we've constructed called civilization and society and culture and finance and all of these things. So metaphysically, absolute. Epistemologically, we cultivate the mind and the gut. And ethically, we do what's right for us with this knowledge, with the knowledge that no one can do ultimately what's right for us or know what's right for us, and we can't do that for another person, but we're generally human. With all of that in mind, we know that one thing must be essential if any of those things are going to be had, if any of those things are going to be useful and workable. We must have one thing in this world. We must have one thing as a primary, fundamental, and inextricable component and ingredient, first and foremost, or we won't be able to make it, or we won't have a world worth living in, a moral and ethical world, or we won't be able to find our way to a moral and ethical life, even if we are informed intellectually and intuitively. We must have freedom. There is no way to build a system, a framework, not for another individual. We must do that for children, for people that aren't well, that are ill, because they aren't able. They don't have the capacity at the moment. But we can never do that morally and ethically other than we're doing for people that can't. We can't do that for another individual that is capable, competent, without being unethical and immoral. We will cause suffering, potentially, almost certainly, because we cannot know what's right for another individual. We cannot determine right objectively. We cannot determine right for a universe, a parameter, a context that we don't have access to. We can only do that for ourselves. So we must have liberty. We must have freedom, period. Or none of it works. We cannot reach homeostasis because we will encounter barriers, boundaries, walls, and be saddled with obligations and duties that are not right for us. We will be told this is the type of music, or we won't be allowed to listen to this certain type of music that is right for us. We won't get the diet or the occupation. We must have the ability to navigate that extra small 20, 30, or 1 or less than 1% for ourselves, or this is an immoral and unethical world, which it is, quite literally. We're doing, I wouldn't say our best, but I believe we're trying. But what we're trying to do is build something for everyone without understanding what we are fundamentally, what this is essentially, and knowing ourselves in any real sense, intuitively or intellectually. We're running a narrative, a story about us that's really carried over for the past several thousand years, and it's not working. It doesn't fit. There's a way to organize people so that they can maintain groups and order and prosper and stave off threats. But there's no way to organize people that brings them to the most right life, the most ethical and moral life, which is what I call existential homeostasis anyway. It's just you being the most right you can be. The most right you can be should lead to the best life. Right should not lead to worse, unless doing what's right for you runs afoul or against others in their framework, their system, because there's not enough freedom, enough flex for you to do what's right for you. Now, there's going to be people, without a doubt, that are going to run against others in their right. There will be some conflict. However, it should even out. It should further the collective. It should lift us all up. That conflict between this person's right and this person's right, or these people's right and these people's right, fundamentally, truthfully, well-informed, intellectually and intuitively, with an understanding of this and themselves and others, that should further us. That friction, that tension should sharpen us. We don't want and shouldn't expect everyone to be identical. Yeah, we're human, but we're not perfectly the same. We're not one and the same, interchangeable. We have some variation. And understanding that, allowing for that, and knowing that some people are going to run afoul of what we believe, that is just the way it's going to be. Understanding that and knowing that they're going to do that means that we can accommodate, we can account for it, and we will meet that opposition or that interference with sober rationality. It's just what it is. Some people will run afoul, run against, or contrast what I know personally, individualistically, to be right. We aren't going to achieve what would be a moral and ethical world anytime soon, which would be a completely anarchistic world. Absolutely anarchistic. Absolute anarchy should be our goal. One where there is no limitation, no boundary, no border, no system to hinder another's pursuit of truth, of right, of existential homeostasis. We aren't anywhere close to that. We aren't informed intuitively or intellectually about ourselves close to reasonably enough. We don't understand the world. We have a bunch of stories about the universe, about each other, so they're incompatible. And we do not believe that each other is capable of doing what's right. In a very real sense, most of us are not. We're going to seek pleasure, we're going to seek security and comfort before we seek what's intuitively right for us. However, just because it isn't possible right now doesn't mean it shouldn't be seen as a necessary evil. Just like rearing children should be seen as, I must do this. I know I'm limiting you. I know I don't understand truthfully what's right for you, but I'm doing what's best. And one day I will let you be. Legally at 18, but maybe sooner. One day I will let you be free because I know I don't know. As long as we understand that it must be done away with as soon as possible, that the goal is to raise a child, raise a person, help an injured or sick or disabled person get to a point to where they can do for themselves, because only they can do for themselves if they're capable, perfectly right, truthfully, ethically, morally. As long as we're doing this to get someone to a point to where they can be free, as long as we're building systems and institutions and a world, a civilization, so that we can get to a point to where we don't need to limit and hinder anymore, then I think we can accept this as a tolerable, necessary evil, really out of love. We must have some type of framework or we'll tear it all apart. We're not healthy enough. We're not informed enough. We're not moral and epistemologically evolved enough. We don't have a metaphysical framework that's shareable and congruent across the species. So we must build something, or we can't really even exist around one another, especially not now. But that should be seen as a necessary evil. We aren't able currently, therefore we must impose some rules, some contingencies, some regulations, some boundaries and parameters, or we will run off the rails and we will end ourselves. So that's politics. Freedom, primary, the highest good, the most essential and primary component in any world, in any organization, in any system. And that's my philosophical framework in a nutshell. Very simple. I really appreciate what Ayn Rand's done because I tend to overcomplicate things. I've thought of philosophical frameworks as being something that needed multiple volumes, had to cover every potential argument or retort. And I wasn't really in a hurry to do anything like that. But this is simple enough. This is also on my website as well. A little bit more fleshed out, a little bit more coherent on the website potentially. But I wanted to make this video because said I would, number one, and also because it's important for us to understand, in my opinion, that we are capable of living well together. But it's very difficult to do. It's almost impossible, if you look at probability, to do in a world without a sound philosophical framework. So this is my contribution. I thank Ayn Rand for hers. I don't view things the way she does, and I think this is a better one. But I hope you enjoy this, and I hope you let me know what you think. I hope you find something in this, and if you have any questions or any objections or just queries or points to make or add, find me on Discord. I'm over there. If you have anything to discuss or talk about, add it to that channel. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day. Take care. Later.